One of the most dangerous things you can do to an athlete is put doubt in their mind by telling them that they can't do something. Confidence is an amazing weapon in professional sport, and Australia is at risk of taking away the confidence which is oozing out of Sam Konstas' pores. Right now, Konstas is on a high. He made his test debut in Melbourne, stole the show in front of a massive crowd, and then played at his home ground at the SCG as the Aussies won the Border Gavaskar Trophy. There would be no doubt in his mind that he's good enough to play at the highest level. So what will Konstas be thinking if the selectors overlook him for the first test against Sri Lanka in Galle and move Travis Head into the opening spot? He'll naturally ask the question, why? That's bad for an athlete. As Maverick said to Rooster in Top Gun,
"You think up there you're dead, believe me."
The response for Konstas can only be that the selectors have doubts around his ability to play in the subcontinent and that Head is more suited to that position. Konstas could easily ask what evidence they have to suggest that he's not ready for the spinning wicket. Because here's the reality. Nobody knows how it will go in Sri Lanka. The risk of not picking him is larger than the risk of keeping him in the team. By picking him, the selectors will get answers. By picking him, Konstas will learn. Can he read the ball in the air and off the pitch? Can he move his feet properly? Can he score runs over there? Does he need to spend the winter working on facing spin? Is he actually a good player of spin who hasn't had the chance to prove himself? Now isn't the time to pigeonhole an elite young talent and make him question his ability. Now is the time to play him everywhere, because we want Konstas to be the long-term opener for the Australian Test team. We need him to be perfectly prepared for when the team travels to India for a 5-test series in 2027. Before then, we need him to be confident for the World Test Championship in England in June. Then we need him to head to the West Indies and experience those conditions with confidence too. Australia didn't put doubt in Konstas' mind when he debuted. They let him attack Jasprit Bumrah and it was spectacular. So fill the man with confidence again. Pick him in Sri Lanka and make it clear he is the country's choice as a long-term opener. Tell him to do whatever is needed to play in all conditions. Messing with his mind by choosing another path would be nothing more than being foolish. And we are 2 days away from the first test between Australia and Sri Lanka in Galle. And joining me to discuss everything around that tour is our wonderful cricket writer, Jackson Barrett. Jacko, welcome.
Morning, Cod. Thanks for having me on again.
So, first test against Sri Lanka is on Wednesday. I'm not sure we're any closer to knowing a team. What are your thoughts at the moment?
Yeah, I don't think we are awfully closer. I think the one thing that is starting to kind of iron itself out is that it looks like Matt Kuhneman will be available. That doesn't necessarily mean he'll play, but the reporters on the ground in Galle say that he batted for 10 minutes in the nets on Sunday evening and then came out and gave every single one of his coaches a fist bump on the way off. So I think that's a pretty decent chance that that his right thumb, which is dislocated, is going to be good to go. He did that in a Big Bash game a couple of weeks ago. The main concerns are around his batting and his fielding rather than his bowling, because he bowls left arm finger spin. So it appears that he is over the line. Then he just kind of comes into the wash with all the other selection options, because they've taken 3 frontline spinners in Kuhneman, the left armour, and then, of course, Lyon and Murphy, the 2 more traditional off spinners, and then Cooper Connolly is there as well. So the makeup of the bowling unit is most fascinating. Will Australia take 1 seamer? Will they take 2? How heavily will they lean on Beau Webster's seam bowling all-rounders? And then there's the top of the order. So Sam Konstas seems to be a really strong option there as well. He's the incumbent opener. But Travis Head has opened overseas in the past as well, and Nathan McSweeney is there too. So there's just so many options, so many things up in the air, 48 hours out from the first test, which I think is interesting. It's an interesting stage for Australian cricket, particularly overseas, and we're going to learn a lot about them at the selection table.
And this is where Sam Konstas becomes really, really interesting. You spoke to Ricky Ponting about him the other day. You know, do we open with Konstas or do we open with Head? And what are the benefits both ways, both for the teams and for the individuals?
Yeah, the benefit of opening Head is that he tends to like pace on the ball early in his innings. So it all but guarantees that he will face at least 10 overs of seamer early in his innings before he gets set. And then he can go about trying to take down the spin a little bit more. But Travis Head is always big on pace on the ball early in his innings. So that's the plus side for Travis Head. The plus side for the team is that I feel like that's the spot for the extra all-rounder. If they were to play Webster and Connolly, that door would have to open up by Travis Head, who normally bats a 5, going up the order. So that's the other one as well. Clearly, Travis Head is able to get teams off to a pretty strong start. He has a good record opening the batting in the subcontinent, so that's also a benefit for Australia. For Konstas, the benefit for him is the continuity at Test cricket and the feeling of, hey, I did a pretty good job the first time around, and they've stuck with me, even though they're conditions that I haven't really played on before and that sort of thing. Like, I'm the guy now, which is important leading up to an Ashes series as well. Ponting was a massive advocate for just Konstas being the inform opener in the country and Australia having a really steady order that should be stuck with. I think the other thing around Konstas is the cavalier style that he played Bumrah with at the MCG and then again at the SCG. That's actually not Sam Konstas. Like, he's made Shield hundreds where he's striking at 60, and he's done the graft. And the first time we saw that sort of stroke play from Sam Konstas was in the Prime Minister's 11 game against India that was actually rain reduced to a 50 over match. Like, at Shield level, he's not that guy. He was sent out there. He was identified as being able to do a job and sent out there to do it. That's not to say that he couldn't come in and just be a traditional opener at the top of the order. I'd probably be leaning towards Head and Khawaja, particularly if there are concerns over Kuhnemann, to open the door for an all-rounder, or even a Nathan McSweeney who can bowl a bit of off-spin in the middle order. I feel like Sri Lanka might just be a bridge too far for Konstas. Like, I don't see a need for Australia to send him out to go at 1,000,000 miles an hour, because he was sent out there to do that to counter the stranglehold that Jasprit Bumrah had on them. And I can't see any of the Sri Lankan bowlers being able to do the same thing. And then it's about what's left behind. Like, you can't take that risk with a walking wicket up the top. So I think you need to kind of maintain that batting depth by having 2 traditional openers. And I think Head is capable of doing that. I think the decks would just be a little bit too tricky for Konstas. Head has the experience there, and then it allows them a little bit more flexibility in the middle order. So not that I'm one to naturally sit here and disagree with Ricky Ponting, obviously, but I see a lot of merit in Travis Head opening the batting, and I have my concerns over Konstas doing the role.
So I find the Konstas debate fascinating in that there's a perception about him that he's not going to be able to go over to Sri Lanka and play at the moment. But there's no facts around it. It's just this belief around the way that he plays. And that perception can become really dangerous if it's wrong and he doesn't get the chance to prove the other way. It's almost like people are saying, you're not going to be able to, so we're not going to pick you. Or why not find out at least with one and just give him that chance? Because otherwise we could be saying we're not going to pick you for the subcontinent despite no real facts behind that. Do you see that argument being in play?
Yeah, like you make a really good point. And remember, like we've got a tour of India in 2027 where he will be, you would think, entrenched in Australia's best 11 cricketers by then. So that is a really good point. And of course, you've got the World Test Championship sewn up, and it's that unique Test series that we've spoken about before where you have that element of opportunity. I think important though, like Konstas is 19. Like to say that he's not getting an opportunity now, I don't think means that he's never getting an opportunity. So I'm still probably leaning towards Head, but I take the point, and I feel like there have been guys that have fallen, whether it's playing spin, playing other types of bowling, playing other types of conditions. I feel like there have been guys that have fallen victim of that before, but I think being 19, there's still enough time for Konstas to become a subcontinent player with a little bit more experience under his belt.
The fact you showed it to Ponting I found really interesting, just in that Ponting struggled in India for a long time. So he averaged 12.3 in his first 14 innings in India. So he never really got the opportunity to as we said, go to other venues and figure out what it was like. And when he got there, it was always like, oh, hello, this joint's really, really hard. And then he figured it out and became a much better subcontinent player in the back end of his career. So yeah, I wonder whether he, by talking up Konstas, he's thinking about his own experience a little bit and thinking maybe there's a bit of that around it. So yeah, it will be interesting to see how they go. Kuhnemann and Murphy, I would say. Yep. So Kuhnemann's got the injury, as you said, but it's going to be bowling and fielding that will impact it. the thumb itself, what's your thoughts on trying to play him, knowing that 1/3 of the things that he does, well, not really necessarily 1/3 because he's not going to bat for a long time, will be impacted in some way? Is it worth that risk, or do you go with a Murphy to make sure that there's absolutely no risk of either an injury or just not being able to perform at his best?
Yeah, probably be leaning towards not playing him. I'm sure that, he batted for 10 minutes in the nets. He's probably going to face largely spin, which will be a little bit easier on that hand, which is his top hand on the bat. So there's that to factor in as well. I don't know if you can hide guys in the field in Test cricket, and I think that's part of the problem. Like, you need him to be spending large parts of the day's play on the ground so that he can bowl long spells. And I think that is probably the bit that worries me. Like, the idea of Australia kind of carrying someone in the field a little bit scares me. I know that he's got a big brace on it at the moment, or a cast on his thumb. I don't know how much he'd be able to wear that in play. So I'd probably be leaning towards not playing. The other factor is that if it was to cop a knock either batting or fielding on day one, and he just ends up in immense pain, because obviously it's a pretty tender injury, I would imagine, or it dislocates again, or he's in real trouble, then you go in a bowler down on a wicket where you're going to really need them. So I think for the sake of this, I'd probably be looking at Lyon and Murphy. And then if they were to do the two off spinners, obviously spinning the ball the same way, then Cooper Connolly comes into the conversation. We spoke in depth about Cooper a couple of weeks ago, Cod, but being that left-arm finger spin option who can also bat in the middle order, or if he was to bat 8, he'd really lengthen the batting lineup. So I think that's where he comes into play. But I would probably be looking at starting with Lyon and Murphy as your two frontline spinners, and then working out what you need from there.
How do you reckon Connolly would be feeling right now, knowing he's genuinely close, and there's someone who might not be available, which makes him even closer? Like, do you reckon he'd be having a few sleepless nights at the moment, or is he a pretty relaxed character who will handle this regardless?
He's a very relaxed character, and I think things in Cooper Connolly's cricket life have come pretty quickly, and they've all been taken in his stride really nicely. But I mean, Test cricket, I know that Test cricket means a lot to him, means a lot to his family. So this, I'd imagine there will be some sleepless nights. I'd imagine he would have a pretty close eye on what Matt Kuhneman's doing in the nets and that sort of thing. I think the big thing with Cooper is being 21. Like, the opportunity is going to come at some stage. It might even come in 2 weeks' time at the same venue. So I think he's the kind of kid that takes things pretty well as they come. And I would imagine he's handling this pretty well. Remember, his first class debut was in a Shield final where Cam Bancroft had fallen off his bike on the Sunday before the Thursday start, and he only learned that he was even in the mix a couple of days beforehand. So, I think he'd be taking it pretty well, but it'd be an interesting few days. It'd be an interesting few days for a lot of guys there, like same for Konstas, same for Kuhneman and Murphy. So really interesting.
I'm not a believer that it might happen in the future. Once you get this close, you got to get into the damn team, because so many guys have toured and everyone goes, oh, they're amazing, or they've been a 12th man, oh, they're fantastic, and then suddenly the world changes and you don't get the chance to play. So hopefully for his sake, this moment comes for him this week, and we can see him out there. There's a really interesting question around the opening bowlers. Do we need two pacemen? We always play two pacemen, but do we actually need them? Could Beau Webster play as the other paceman and then come on and bowl spin? Because in India in 2023, Scotty Boland only bowled the 2nd, 7th, 9th and 34th overs. Like, he was in and out early, and then we went to spin. And in the second test, we went in with Cummins as the only paceman. In the third and fourth test, we opened with Cummins and Green. Like, do we need to have that second quick, or can Webster do both roles and that opens the door for a different sort of look?
I think one of the major things they'll be weighing up when it comes time to make that decision is the fitness of Mitchell Starc. Remember, he carried that rib injury through the back end of the Border Gavaskar Trophy. He did an interview with News Corp across the past couple of days where he's basically said, he wasn't trying to shield the details of that injury from the public. He was trying to shield it from himself. He kind of wouldn't let himself admit that he was injured at the back end of that series. But that series finished 3 weeks ago, and I'm sure he's received some proper treatment and they might have better diagnosed what that looks like. Clearly he's fit to play here, but is he fit to bowl those like really long haul overs that could end up being required if you end up being the lone seamer? I certainly think he will be the most damaging of Australia's bowlers because he can swing the new ball for a few overs. Like, that doesn't tend to last forever on those sort of drier wickets, but he can also is an excellent exponent of reverse swing later in the innings. So I think starts a man if they were to go with one. It's just about weighing up, is Webster enough backer or do you need Boland? To be honest, like, if they feel like Mitchell Starc can get through the overs required, I'd probably be taking one seamer into this game. I'm not sure Scotty Boland is going to be quite as effective on these wickets. He really battled in his one test in India a couple of years ago. And it's then the questions about Webster. So Webster actually bowled off spin in the nets the other day, which is an interesting quirk to all of this. I'm sure we will see him bowl off spin at some point because he's so much taller than Lyon and Murphy that he just offers. He's going to give the Sri Lankan batters something else to look at while he still spins it the same way. So, yeah, I think it appears that they have great confidence in Beau Webster and really good confidence in his seam bowling. So I think there's a decent chance we take one seamer in.
I love the idea of Webster bowling both. Like, you look at Australian history and, Funky Miller, Colin Miller came in and did both. Andrew Simons has done sort of both. He was not as quick. Mark Waugh was able to bowl medium pace and spin as well. Labuschagne does it a little bit also. Like, if you can get someone mixing and matching, it just changes the entire face of the group and what you're able to try when you go to these conditions.
Yeah, it's kind of like a free hit, right? Like, it's an extra half a cricketer that you're able to include in your 11. I'd be interested to see how effective Webster's offies are. Like, I'm sure they're just going to be chop out overs, but I like the idea of the guy that can probably generate a little bit more bounce and a little bit more over the top end line. So yeah, I'd love to see it as well as a quirk, but also I think it could be pretty effective.
And he's a giant too, and we don't see too many giants bowling spin, do we? Especially in Australia, like we're accustomed to seeing them bowl quick, and suddenly get this almighty big man with big hands, big body bowling spin.
Well, it's an outstanding story, Beau Webster. So he bowled spin in first-class cricket for the best part of a decade, and it was actually against WA. He said that he watched Jake Doran, his Tasmania teammate, who started his career as a wicketkeeper and is still kind of a part-time wicketkeeper. He saw him dismiss Sam Whiteman while WA were batting for a draw on a road down at Bellerive, and he said, if Jake Doran can bowl seam up, I can bowl seam up. So he had a go, and they obviously came out pretty well, and he's a strong man, and they were pretty quick, and he spent an off-season fine-tuning it in the nets down there in Tassie, and here he is. He's he's a pretty good chance to have a new ball for Australia in a test match.
The spinning situation intrigues me because when my first memory of Test cricket was 1984. I'm eight years old. We're playing the West Indies, and we're getting flogged left, right, and centre. But we're going in with spinners who people had never really heard of, and from there, we kept picking multiple spinners for the SCG tests. And the Wacker was always a speed demon. Adelaide Oval was a batting paradise. It swung and seamed at the Gabba, kept low at the MCG, and you had massive boundaries. And then it spun at the SCG. And we don't see those unique characteristics of Australian test venues anymore. And between that test I talked about in 84, over the next 25 tests, we took in multiple spinners 15 times at the SCG, including 8 with Shane Warne there. Across the last 19 tests, we've only done multiple spinners 3 times. So we clearly don't have the opportunity to have that sort of a pitch here. Do we need a spinning venue in Australia so we can give these guys the opportunity before they go overseas and give our players the chance to face more spin at Shield or even just in practice conditions rather than going over there and going, here's 2 tests, here's a week to prepare, good luck?
The discussion around a Shield venue is really interesting. Like, the obvious candidate would be Sydney. I think they did it before an India series not long ago. I think it might have been Hurstville Oval, where they kind of just let the deck dry out and deteriorate and become a bit of a dust bowl and use that to work on. NG Stadium, out at the showgrounds, which has been used, is the Sydney Thunder home ground during the Big Bash, is one where it is like a Sydney Thunder bowl spin there all the time. The Scorchers had great success bowling 14 overs of spin when they played there a couple of weeks ago. So that is a venue that already has those tendencies. The SCG doesn't anymore, but that's largely around the pressures on curators to produce test wickets that are entertaining and go for between 4 and 5 days and that sort of thing. I think when it comes to the Shield, the difficulties would surround fixturing. Like, obviously, you'll just end up with, like, does every team need to play there once, and does New South Wales play there more than once, given that they're likely the only state that could come up with the conditions? Do you have a gather round where everyone plays at a different ground on Sydney that's a low turner if we're going to India in the next couple of months? Like, I feel like the intricacies and the logistics around that would be difficult, but the concept I really like. So Australia has long been full of praise for this facility that they get to use in Dubai, and they spent 5 days at kind of in the middle of last week, which is run by the ICC. It's an ICC academy. They also send young cricketers, Connolly was one of them, to the MRF Academy in Chennai, which is like a spin school effectively for playing and for bowling spin. So there are facilities like that around the world. Clearly having one here would give Australia more control over when and how and who is using it. But it's just about what that looks like. I tend to think it wouldn't need to be more like an academy setup. Like the MRF Academy, where guys can go and spend time, like the old Australian Cricket Academy, like the facilities up at Allan Border Field, that guys can kind of like run through there and use that. I really like the concept.
Yeah, and it would give the spinners around in Australia more opportunities as well. I hadn't thought of a gather round sort of scenario, but at least making everyone play a neutral game at a spinning venue, I think would be fascinating for Shield cricket, and we would see a lot more opportunities for batters to get into it. And the other thing you talked about with Ricky Ponting is the next man Australia will produce who will score 10,000 runs in Test cricket, and that man is Steve Smith, because he needs a grand total of 1.
You'd like to think he gets it on the opening day, wouldn't you? I mean, I think there was clearly we won the series on that day, so people would have been leaving pretty happy, but I think the SCG crowd were really, really keen to see him make it there, and the fact that he'll make it in front of a fort and maybe 7 or 8 spectators in overseas is a little bit disappointing. Obviously prime time on Channel 7, of course, but not quite at a packed out SCG on the final day of the summer. But 10,000 runs is an incredible achievement. He'll be the 4th player to do it, behind, of course, Ponting, Steve Waugh, and Allan Border. And as we've reflected on, like, this is a guy that was in and out of the side for the first couple of years of his career as a leg spinner. And then he burst onto the scene kind of right before the 13-14 Ashes, which we dominated. He made that 100 at the SCG, and then he just exploded from there. He's just had some incredible home summers where he's absolutely racked them up. He's been excellent overseas. He, of course, had that incredible 2019 Ashes after coming back from his ban. He's one of the quirkiest batters that we've ever had as far as technique, and the way he talks about finding or not finding his hands, and that's, so he's been like a fascinating player to watch across more than a decade. I don't know about you, but I feel like sometimes you kind of go 10,000 runs and those 3 names just seem so far above anyone else. Like, you think about guys like Michael Clarke and Michael Hussey and Langer and Hayden, and guys like in my lifetime that have come in and made a lot of runs, and outside of Ponting, that's now Steve Smith is up there. And as Ponting said when we spoke the other day, he can play now for as long as he wants to. Like, that summer that he's just had here, where he scored back-to-back tons in Brisbane and an incredible 100 in Melbourne, which was as strong as he's looked for quite some time. That summer basically buys him certainly the next summer, and probably beyond that if he wants to. So there could be plenty more runs in Steve Smith. I
love the fact that when you look at those 4 guys, so Steve Waugh took 229 innings to get to the 10,000. Allan Border took 246. So they were both knuckle down, work hard, do whatever it takes not to get out and find your runs along the way. And then, so 246 and 229, and then you got Ponting on 197 innings, so significantly less, and Steve Smith will do it in 205. And they're Ponting and Smith are both the graceful, amazing-looking guys who you think are never going to get out and they're going to score runs at will. It takes all types to play this game. It just shows you don't have to be one type of player. You can find your runs in any way. You can be as technical as Ponting. You can be as weird as Smith. You can be as hard as the other two. If you can play, you can play.
Yeah, exactly. And remember, like, thinking about the timing there, Smith was batting at number 8 and certainly not in the side for his batting and not making a hell of a lot of runs early in his career. Like, I know that Ponting battled overseas early in his career, but he made hundreds on Australian soil pretty quickly and was batting in the top order. So Steve Smith has raced there after the start to his career. It's been exception.
So there's an amazing stat around Steve Smith. If you look at his first 25 completed innings, so it was 28 opportunities to bat, 3 of them not out. So his first 25 dismissals, I suppose you could say, he averaged 33 after those. And then in his next 25 dismissals or completed innings, he averaged 84. So he went from, I'm not really that good, and maybe I'm not in the team, to I am the best player in the team. Once he found his hands and he found his footwork and he became confident, the world was his oyster.
Mate, he was the best player in the world during that period. And that's kind of when the big four of him and Root and Connolly and Kane Williamson, who's kind of been around them and fallen off at times. And I love the way that this four has fluctuated. Like, at that period of time, it was Smith. At others, it's been Connolly. And I feel like for longevity, Root kind of comes into the question with Smith as well. So Ponting made a really good point. Like, if you ask an Englishman, they're going to say the Root's the best of them. If you ask an Indian, Kohli's going to say, they're going to say Kohli's the best of them. But I think there's a real argument for Smith there. Yeah, an incredible career trajectory. I know there's been books written about Steve Smith, but once it's all said and done, I think that's going to make, and 50 years down the track, he's just going to be a fascinating kind of guy, and maybe we'll see more of it. We've got blokes bowling off spin and seam up. We've got guys coming to the team as leggies that end up being our greatest ever number 4s. So yeah, I mean, I've got to admit, Steve Smith has frustrated me at times. I never found it pretty to watch. But he's been an incredible batter. He's the best of his generation, and well done to him.
None of us ever saw Bradman. We weren't lucky enough to be around at that time. We can just only marvel at his stats and the few bits of vision that we've got. And Ponting was ridiculous, and Chappell was ridiculous, and all these other things that have happened that we've got vision of. But when Smith was at his absolute peak for that a couple of years where he just was going nuts, I don't reckon we're going to see anyone else who's going to have that sort of dominance and be, as we said, the best since Bradman at one point. That must have been the closest we're probably going to see in our lifetime to someone averaging mid-80s for a long period of time before it becomes impossible. It was a genuine purple patch where we all went, wow.
Yeah, the 17-18 Ashes where I think he scored 100 in each of the first 2 or 3 tests. I remember him scoring 100 in Brisbane, where genuinely, watching it, you just thought, I don't know how these guys are getting him out all series. Then he was banned, and then he came back for the 2019 Ashes, and the only time they really got under they really troubled him was when Jofra Archer hit him at Lords, and he came on concussed. He would have broken all sorts of run-scoring records in that series if he hadn't missed that game or missed the end of that game and the next one with concussion. Probably that 2019 Ashes is the one that stands out to me, is just watching him and going, I can't see how you're ever going to be dismissed. And the only guy in my lifetime that reminded me of that was probably Virat Kohli in one-day cricket, just in the sense that India need 10 and over and they're 6 down, but Kohli's there, so they'll probably still win. That kind of feeling of they'll just get it done because that's what they do. Smith in Test cricket and Kohli in one-day cricket, probably the 2 guys I've kind of felt that with. I was pretty young for a lot of Ponting, but obviously marvelled at him. But yeah, the sheer domination, Smith's right up there.
It's amazing that the Test documentary of him getting concussed and then coming back on and just belting the first ball for 6 and then having a crack shortly afterwards and then forgetting to defend and just padding up and getting out. Yeah. And he said, I wanted to defend, but I couldn't. It just shows that once your brain gets damaged in any way in sport with a concussion, you can't become the same player. I thought that was a fascinating insight into just how hard it is to play sport when you're coming back from a concussion. When we all used to think, oh, you'll be right, it's just a head injury. No, he could see ball and smack it, but he couldn't work out how to get his feet into the right spot and hands into the right spot to defend. So that's a quite remarkable piece of vision. Well, I really appreciate you joining us. It's going to be a fascinating tour of Sri Lanka for the Aussies. As you said, all starts on Wednesday. You can watch it all on Channel 7. It's a great time of day for people to view. So thank you very much for your time, Jackson.
Thanks, Cod. Cheers.